The wind carried dust across the barren prairie, a dry and merciless current that whispered of hunger and despair. At the edge of the rancher's land, where fences met the endless stretch of dirt, a woman staggered forward, cradling a small bundle against her chest. Her dress was torn, her face gaunt, and her eyes hollow with desperation. She pressed the bundle tighter, rocking it as though her embrace alone could shield it from the world. When she reached the gate, she called out, her voice breaking under the weight of hunger and grief. "Please," she cried, "take him, take my baby. Trade him for bread." Her plea hung in the air, thin and trembling, as though the land itself held its breath. The rancher stood on the porch, tall and silent, his figure cut sharp against the fading sun. He had seen many things in his years, droughts that claimed cattle, storms that tore roofs away, men who killed for less than a meal, but he had never seen a mother offer her own child in exchange for bread. His hands were rough from work, his jaw tight, his eyes darkened with something unspoken. He did not answer her, not at first. He only watched, the silence stretching heavier than any words. The woman's knees buckled, and she sank to the ground, clutching the baby as tears streaked down her dirt-stained cheeks. The infant whimpered, weak and restless, as though even he could feel the weight of his mother's desperation. She rocked him with trembling arms, her voice breaking again. "He will starve. If you feed him, if you take him, maybe he will live. I have nothing left to give. Nothing." Her words shattered the still air, and the rancher felt them strike his chest like hammer blows, though his face remained carved in stone. He could have turned away. He could have shut the door and pretended he heard nothing, as so many men might have done in a world that swallowed the weak without remorse. But he did not move. He let the silence linger until it became unbearable, until the woman's sobs turned to ragged gasps. Then, slowly, he stepped down from the porch and crossed the yard, boots grinding against the gravel. She lifted her eyes to him, a flicker of hope igniting through her tears. But when he reached her, he did not offer bread. He did not offer comfort. He simply bent low, his shadow covering them both, and reached for the child. The woman flinched, her instincts warring against her desperation. For a heartbeat she clutched the baby tighter, unwilling to let go, but the hunger gnawed too deep, the truth too cruel. With trembling arms, she surrendered him, pressing her lips to his tiny forehead one last time. "Forgive me," she whispered, though whether the words were for the child or herself, not even she knew. The rancher took the baby in his arms, holding him with a surprising steadiness, his expression unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. Then, with his free hand, he reached for the woman. Her eyes widened in shock, confusion flashing across her worn face. She had expected rejection or perhaps mercy for the child alone, but not this. His grip was firm, not cruel, as he pulled her to her feet. "Both," he said at last, his voice rough as gravel, the first words he had spoken. "I'll take both." The woman stared at him, unable to comprehend what he meant. Both, her and the baby. Her knees trembled again, but his hand steadied her, his silence more powerful than any promise. The rancher turned without another word, carrying the child in one arm and guiding the woman with the other. She stumbled beside him, her body weak, her mind a whirl of disbelief. He led them across the yard, past the barn where cattle shifted restlessly, past the rows of fencing he had built with his own hands, until they reached the porch. The door creaked open, revealing a modest home, plain, sturdy, built for survival, not comfort. The smell of bread drifted faintly from within, warm and haunting. She froze at the threshold, torn between fear and need. This man, this stranger, had taken her last hope into his arms, and now he offered her something she had never dared to dream of, a place beyond the hunger, beyond the dust. But the cost, she did not know. Her heart pounded, her breath shallow, as the child stirred against the rancher's chest. He looked back at her, his eyes hard but not unkind, and in that moment she understood, this was no bargain of bread for a baby. This was a bond forged in silence, a decision neither of them could undo. The door shut behind them, the world outside swallowed by nightfall. The woman stood in the dim light, clutching her ragged dress as the baby whimpered softly. The rancher placed the child gently in a wooden cradle, worn but sturdy, that stood by the fire as though it had been waiting all along. She gasped at the sight of it, her mind reeling. How long had he been ready for this? Did he know she would come? Questions burned inside her, but still he said nothing. His silence was his language, and she would have to learn to understand it. The fire crackled, casting shadows that danced across the walls. The rancher poured water into a tin cup and handed it to her. She took it with shaking hands, her lips dry, her throat aching. When the cool water touched her tongue, she felt life return to her body, a fragile spark amid the darkness. She looked at him then, really looked, and saw not just the hardness of his face, but the weight of solitude etched in every line. He had not taken her out of pity, nor the baby out of charity. He had taken them because his silence had been waiting to be broken, and she had broken it. The days that followed were quiet, the kind of quiet that carried both comfort and unease. The woman, her name was Mara, though she had not spoken it aloud in some time, found herself adjusting to a rhythm not her own. The rancher rose with the dawn, his boots heavy on the wooden floor, his shadow stretching across the yard as he worked the land. He spoke little, and when he did, his words were blunt, stripped of ornament. But his silence was not cruel. It was steady, like the earth itself, a silence that offered more than it demanded. Mara learned quickly that he was a man who gave without explanation and expected nothing in return but presence. The baby, Elias, thrived under the roof that Mara had nearly surrendered him to. Bread, milk, warmth from the hearth, things she had not been able to provide in weeks of wandering. She watched the rancher hold Elias with a surprising gentleness, his rough hands steady, his gaze softened as the infant clutched his finger. Sometimes Mara wondered if he had lost a child before, or a wife, or perhaps both, for there was a space in the home that felt carved for someone no longer there. The wooden cradle by the fire was not newly made. It bore the marks of age, of use. Her heart ached to ask, but the words always died in her throat. Mara tried to help in the ways she knew. She swept floors, washed dishes, mended torn shirts with threads she found in a drawer. At first, the rancher said nothing, simply watching her move through the house like a shadow learning to belong. Then, one morning, when she set fresh water on the table, he gave a slow nod. It was not much, but it was something, a crack in the wall of silence, a sign that he saw her effort. That small acknowledgement warmed her more than 100 words could have. Nights were harder. When the baby slept, Mara would lie awake on the cot by the fire, listening to the wind scratch against the windows and the faint creak of the rancher's bed in the next room. She feared the weight of what she had agreed to, or had she agreed at all. He had not demanded her body, nor pressed her for anything beyond her presence, yet the thought lingered. Had he taken her as possession, as the world so often treated women like her? Or had he taken her because he, too, needed saving? These questions gnawed at her, and in the silence of night, they were louder than the coyotes. One evening, while she stirred a pot of beans on the stove, she found her courage. "Why both?" she asked, her voice low but steady. "You could have taken just the boy. That was the trade I offered." The spoon trembled in her hand as she spoke. The rancher looked up from where he sat at the table, his gaze lingering on her for a long moment. His answer was simple, yet it carried the weight of something larger than words. "Because bread alone won't keep him alive." Mara frowned, trying to grasp his meaning. "What do you mean?" she pressed. His eyes dropped to the table, his jaw tight. "A child without a mother is already starving." Then he said no more. His words rooted themselves deep inside her. They were not romantic, not tender, but they were true. She realized then that in his silence was an understanding of loss, perhaps even of loneliness that mirrored her own. He had not saved them because he wanted property. He had saved them because he knew survival meant more than food, it meant belonging, even in a place that felt barren of it. Over the weeks, Mara grew stronger. Her face filled with color again, her hands steadied, her body carried less of the tremble of hunger. She began to walk the fields with Elias swaddled against her chest, watching the rancher mend fences, guide cattle, and plow soil hardened by the sun. She saw the sweat glisten on his brow, the muscles of a man built by labor, the silence of someone who spoke more with his deeds than with his mouth. And slowly, she began to understand his language. When he set bread on the table, it was not just food, it was trust. When he left the door unlatched at night, it was not carelessness, it was faith. But not all was safety. Whispers of drought stretched across the land, neighbors watched with suspicious eyes, and Mara knew that tongues in town would wag if they ever saw her there, pale and ragged, clinging to a man who had never explained his claim over her. She feared the day someone would ask, "Who is she? Where did she come from?" And she had no answer that the world would accept. She feared even more that the rancher, with his silence, would give no answer at all. And yet, for all the fears that clung to her, Mara found herself watching him with a growing ache in her chest. She wanted to thank him, not with words but with something deeper. She wanted to understand the man who had taken her when she had nothing, who had said, both, when she had offered only one. But silence still stood between them, thick and unbroken, and Mara realized that one day, it would either become the bridge that bound them together, or the wall that split them apart. One night, as the baby slept and the firelight dimmed low, Mara whispered into the quiet, not knowing if he could hear through the walls, "What will become of us?" Her voice was soft, fragile, but the question hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore. And though no answer came, she felt the weight of his silence settle over her like a vow.